Hey guys, what's up? Today we'll be looking at a review of the Bake Off challenge number 1. Since it's Cake Week, the first challenge is the signature challenge. This is to make a family-size fruity cake. The type of cake is completely up to their decision, but it must be fresh fruit, no dried fruit allowed. Noel says, basically, if this was a party, sultanas would not be on the guest list. They have a time limit of 2 hours. Paul says the point of the challenge is to test the contestants' ability to identify whether the cake is baked, as fresh fruit releases a lot of liquid, making it difficult to identify exactly when it is baked. Prue says, when you stick a skewer in to see if the cake is done, the skewer may come out wet, because it has hit a piece of fresh fruit, and you will be fooled into believing the cake is not done. It's not a very easy start to the bake-off. James is making a rhubarb, orange and ginger cake with a crumble topping. It reminds him of his childhood. The rhubarb is picked fresh from his allotment. 600 grams of rhubarb is to be used in the sponge, and the rhubarb is to be added in raw, and the intention is to cook it for an hour so it becomes soft. 4 bakers are using the traditional apple in their bakes. Stacey is making a Graysmith apple and walnut cake containing 5 apples with walnut storsel and caramel sauce, and for flavouring cinnamon and nutmeg. Liam is making an apple crumble cake inspired based off his sister's lack of a sweet tooth. It is called an apple and almond crumble maple loaf. It's lightly spiced with nutmeg and cinnamon, topped with flaked almonds and a maple syrup glaze. He has decided to go for a loaf tin. This is where Paul Hollywood questions him, as the smaller baking tins will cook faster. Liam explains that he prefers the shape of loaf. Julia is making a courgette and lemon cake topped with blueberries and filled with lemon curd. She forgot to squeeze her courgettes to remove the excess liquid from them using a tea towel. Sophie is making a pineapple and coconut sandwich cake. She will add as the filling coconut Italian meringue buttercream, with the topping having flaked coconut and pineapple flowers. Peter is making a coconut cake using coconut flour, coconut milk and coconut sugar, and a buttercream frosting. This is a lot of coconut for a product, and so you can obviously tell it's going to be overpowering to start off with. A tropical fresh fruit cake with a mango and pineapple puree and limoncello liqueur. He mentioned he's used no butter. Prue said no butter, no marge, no oil. Well, then you must have a tremendous amount of fruit in there. Chris replied, well, you need to taste the fruit in there, don't you? The nature of the moisture in the fruit should help to ensure that the cake doesn't become too stodgy. And though not using any sort of fat in the cake, you get a natural kind of sweetness and fattiness through the mango, which should help to deal with the baking. Also, in doing this, he therefore does not have the same risk as someone like James, who has used everything that's required for a cake, so the eggs and the oil or the butter, but because he has used a lot of fresh rhubarb, that will become quite problematic, as you'll see later. At this point, they have just over an hour to go. Liam asks James how long his cake is going to be in the oven for. James replies 75 minutes. This is when Liam looks incredibly shocked, but he reassured him and said it's most likely just going to be an hour. At this stage, they're slightly into the bake, and Chris says to the camera, the longer you look at it, the faster it cooks. This follows on to another problem that Jan is having, where she cannot get her oven on. This is a classic situation, always at some point within the bake-off, no matter which season you go back to, you will have at least one baker who wonders why their oven isn't working. Obviously, this year it has to be Jan. And then, as you can see, Stacy in the red ends up explaining that if the red light is not on, then the oven isn't. Jan is making an apple crumble cake consisting of diced Bramley apples and ground cinnamon. It is at this point where Jan has only just turned on the oven and has decided to put her cake straight into the oven. Because of this leads to a very baking that the crumble has just become incredibly stodgy, and she describes it as a puddle of fat. This is because she put the cake in and hadn't preheated the oven. As you know, if you were to put something in straight from cold, it takes about 10 minutes for the oven to properly warm up, and you are looking at about 180 degrees. That's the magic temperature that you should be working at with all bakes in order to get like a perfect bake. This temperature works with any sort of food regardless of what you're serving. Flo is explaining to Paul and to Prue about her cake, and Paul takes the mickey with her northern accent, saying when she said curd, she said it in a very northern way. She is making a triple-layered citrus layer cake filled with fresh oranges and lemons, with lemon curd and buttercream. We then move on to Tom. He's making a gilded pear and cardamom cake with blackberry compote and fresh blackberries for decoration. He's using gold leaf to give the pear its gilded look, and that will be displayed on the top of the cake. Kate is making a Moroccan strawberry and rose cake with an intricate stenciled finish using freeze-dried strawberries. The filling consists of cream cheese frosting and rose water. Prue says that she loves the combination of strawberry and rose, but asks how Kate is going to make sure one doesn't dominate the other. Kate says she is going to layer the cake with strawberries going through, so hopefully the juices of that will kind of combine with the rose to mellow out the rose a little. We then proceed to Stephen, who is making a bonfire night apple cake using mini toffee apples, candied citrus zest, and as a filling, mascarpone cinnamon cream. He is using a melon baller to carve out circular pieces of apple, where he hopes to leave them upside down on a tray rack, cover them in toffee sauce, and when completed should look like the flames of a fire. For those using separate tins to make layers, they explain it will be quicker to bake, but for those who are using a whole cake, it will take longer. Stacy then remarks it should be ready in 4 minutes, and she also says not a chance in hell. Liam regrets going for a full loaf and says he should have just gone for a sandwich. Sandy says through narration that unless the bakers have left enough time for the cakes to cool, there'll be no time to make decorations or spread their fillings on. Obviously, when you're dealing with a hot cake, any sort of icing will just melt and run completely over the cake, therefore not creating the desired effect for them. The other aspect is obviously, since it's a hot cake, handling, hot food is difficult at the best of times, and to then proceed to trying to decorate something is just beyond absurd. Stacy then takes a skewer to her bake, and she looks mortified, shaking her head to say it's not ready. Obviously, you've seen from the cake she's doing that it's very deep, so it needed to be put in the oven probably as one of the first, and obviously the apples being fresh and freshly cut up have released a lot of juice into them, making it a bit more unstable than some of the other cakes. When taking his cake from the tray, part of the bottom of James' cake is stuck to the tray. He says, if I tuck it under, he says this to the camera, don't tell anyone. This is due to the excessive moisture from the rhubarb he was using. He would have been in a better place if he had perhaps cooked out the rhubarb for maybe 5-10 minutes just to just to remove the excess liquid, or perhaps to have, when he cooked it, maybe stewed a couple of pieces. That way he could have mixed that into the batter immediately for the cake. Therefore, if he was concerned about the flavour, the stewed rhubarb would at least give them a bit of a taste. Kate's Moroccan strawberry and rose cake. Paul says he thinks Kate has lost a bit of the stencil. As you can see, obviously it's covered in flowers, and so part of the stencil effect is hidden under that. Prue says she's always had a bit of a problem with things you're not going to eat, for example, the marigolds. Noel then proceeds to eat one of the said marigolds and says, my favourite bit. And then he removes it from his mouth, and it says it tastes like a clown's nose. Prue says the cake tastes only of rose water. It's not what they wanted from a fruity cake. Paul says it's a case of style above substance. The judges then proceed to Peter, and that's obviously his coconut cake. Paul asks, how much baking powder did you add in there? Peter replies, 5 teaspoons. Paul replies, shaking his head, oh yeah, that it's burning my tongue. Prue says, before the baking powder hits you, you get a really nice coconut flavour. They then move on to Tom's gilded pear and cardamom cake. Prue says, if someone had said to me that you were going to put a whole pear on top of a cake, I would have said, no, that's silly. But it actually looks very sprightly. Paul says the cakes have been overbaked. They move on to Julia's courgette and lemon cake. Prue says it is a little bit peppy. That's obviously going to be from the poppy seeds that were also used in them. And obviously the lemon zest and the strength of the lemons. Julia then admits to the judges that she had forgotten to wring out the courgettes. Prue says, well, you're a nice, honest girl. Noel says, I told you not to tell them. The judges move on to Flo's citrus layer cake. Paul says it looks well baked, but you did finish quite early. Flo admits to leaving the lemon curd in the fridge. Prue says, that's a good sponge. Paul says, loads of orange flavour coming through. Prue says, I think there is enough citrus coming through there. And that the thought of the lemon curd sounds lovely, but unless you were very restrained with the thinnest layer, it would have been overpowering. They then move on to Chris's tropical fresh fruit cake. Prue says she has never heard of a cake with no fat, with only 2 eggs used. Paul says he believes the sponge is baked to perfection. Prue says it has flavour, but there is no texture in the middle, as obviously from the weight of the fruit, it has become squashed. They then move on to Liam's apple and almond crumble maple loaf. Not much is said about it, only that Prue says it's stodgy. It looks stodgy just from appearance alone. It's a very thick loaf. And Paul says it's a bit boring. It's very typical, kind of like an American style bake. The judges proceed to Jan's windfall apple crumble cake. Paul says he is not getting a lot of flavour through. He says, I'm getting sponge and I'm getting an apple. Prue says it's not as light as air, but it's a good sponge. Paul says, I think you got away with it, considering that it's your second one. Jan replies, I'll take that as a win. Noel then replies and says, you might take it as a draw. And they just laugh at that. The judges move on to Stephen's bonfire night cake. Prue says it looks absolutely delicious. She loves the bonfire flames and the shine on the toffee is perfect. Paul says it's beautifully baked to get that texture of apple, which is just slightly soft, and then have those gorgeous warming spices coming through is great. Prue says the combination of flavours is perfect, and it's just like a little sum up of autumn. Very well thought. Through Paul, then he extends his hand for his famous Hollywood handshake. The judges move on to Stacey's Graysmith apple and walnut cake. Prue says it looks like the apples have sunk a little. Paul says the bake's okay, but he gets only a very small hint of cinnamon. He is not convinced that the whole thing has worked together. They then proceed to James. His creation is the orange rhubarb and ginger crumble cake. Prue says she thinks it looks a bit rustic. That's a polite way of saying it does look a bit haggard. Paul says it's wet and flooded with water when it went in the oven. Prue says nothing that a bit of custard couldn't help. They move on to Sophie's pineapple and coconut sandwich cake. Paul says it's very neat, the piping is good. Prue says the texture is lovely, the pineapple flavour comes walloping through. You must have dried the pineapple a bit. First, Sophie says yes. Paul offers a second Hollywood handshake, saying that this is absolutely delicious. The pineapple coming through is delicious, and the silkiness that comes from the Italian meringue goes so well with that pineapple. So, guys, this is the end of the first challenge. What do you think of the bakers so far? Who do you think is your favourite to then win Star Baker? Who do you think is going to go out? Which cake do you think kind of hid under the radar? It wasn't brilliant, but it wasn't terrible. As always, leave your comments down below. Make sure to subscribe for more of these Great British Bake Off reviews. Obviously, I'm going to do the second part, which is the technical challenge, and then obviously the third part, which is the showstopper. And click the bell for notifications. And as always, thank you for taking the time to watch the video.